In the winding paths of medieval Europe, surrounded by dark forests and rolling hills, a curious mystery unfolded time and again. Entire towns, once bustling with life, simply vanished. No dramatic explosions, no dragons swooping from the skies, no wizard's curse, just silence where there had once been noise, dust where there had been homes, and fields where there had once been streets. The Middle Ages was an era of both resilience and fragility, and the reasons entire towns disappeared were as complex and interwoven as the era itself. Imagine walking through the countryside, perhaps as a weary pilgrim or a merchant with a horse-drawn cart, and stumbling upon the crumbling remains of a stone wall. Moss-covered bricks poke through the earth like fossilized bones. A well stands alone in a field, its rope long rotted away. There are no signposts, no locals, no sounds of livestock or laughter. Just a lingering sense that people once lived, here and then, for some reason, left it all behind. This wasn't some rare occurrence. It happened again and again across medieval Europe, leaving behind ghost villages that sparked wonder and confusion for centuries. One of the most powerful forces behind these vanishing towns was disease. The Middle Ages were stalked by epidemics, and the most infamous among them was the Black Death. When the plague swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, it didn't just kill, it decimated. In some areas, entire populations were wiped out within weeks. A town could lose half its people in a season. Without enough survivors to tend the fields, feed the animals, or even bury the dead, the survivors had little choice but to abandon their homes. The death toll wasn't just tragic, it was transformative. The very layout of civilization shifted in its wake. But the plague wasn't the only illness haunting medieval towns. There were recurring waves of sickness, from leprosy to sweating sickness, and without modern medicine or an understanding of germs. These outbreaks struck fear into the hearts of the people. When death came too often, those who could leave often did. Sometimes entire communities relocated to what they believed were healthier or more blessed lands, leaving behind ghost towns that nature slowly reclaimed. Famine was another quiet killer. Crop failures due to poor weather, overfarming, the Little Ice Age, a period of cooler temperatures, beginning in the late Middle Ages, could plunge a town into starvation. Medieval people depended heavily on the harvest. There were no supermarkets or global supply chains. When the fields failed, so did the people. Extreme cases, famine led not only to death but to migration. Families packed what little they had and sought survival elsewhere. If the famine lasted several years, as it did in the early 1300s, entire regions could be emptied of human life. War was a relentless force during the Middle Ages. Europe was a quilt of ever-shifting borders, dynasties, and rival factions. Battles weren't confined to open fields between knights in armor. Armies moved through the countryside, plundering as they went. A town in the wrong place at the wrong time could be burned to the ground, its people either slaughtered or scattered. The 100 Years' War, the Crusades, and countless local feuds devastated communities across the continent. Even if a town wasn't directly attacked, it might be drained of its young men, stripped of resources, and left vulnerable to bandits. While some towns never recovered from the blows of war and were eventually forgotten. Economic shifts also played a surprising role. Some towns vanished, not because of bloodshed or blight, but because trade routes changed. In an age when roads were dirt and rivers were highways, the flow of commerce was everything. If a new bridge was built or a port rose to prominence, a once thriving town could wither as merchants took their business elsewhere. Markets dried up, craftsmen moved away, and eventually the town lost its purpose. Over time, people might drift away slowly until only the wind moved through the empty buildings. Environmental changes also had their say. Rivers changed course. Floodplains became swamps. Soil was exhausted or eroded. A town built near a river could find itself stranded after the water shifted miles away. Or conversely, a village could be drowned by flooding. Without modern engineering or the ability to adapt quickly, people had to move where the land allowed them to live. Nature had the final say, and when it turned against a community, the people often had little choice but to disappear with it. There's also a quieter, more psychological reason towns vanished: fear. Superstition ran deep in medieval life. A plague-stricken village might be seen as cursed or haunted. A massacre might leave a stain of dread that lingered for generations. If people believed that a place had been forsaken by God or inhabited by evil spirits, they would avoid it entirely. Stories would spread, and before long the site would be erased from communal memory. Fear could exile a town as surely as sword or famine. Sometimes the towns didn't vanish all at once. They eroded slowly, like a candle burning down. The young people would leave first, looking for better prospects in growing cities.
Sure.
The blacksmith would die, and no one would replace him. The church would crumble, and no one would repair it. One by one, the lights would go out. Decay didn't always roar, often whispered. The traces of these vanished towns still exist if you know where to look. Archaeologists have found entire settlements buried beneath fields, their outlines visible only from the air. Unearthed pottery shards, collapsed wells, and stone foundations speak of lives once lived, in places now silent. In England alone, there are thousands of known deserted medieval villages. Some were carefully excavated. Others are simply names on old maps with no clear location. Interestingly, the disappearance of these towns also helped pave the way for change. The decline of rural villages in the wake of the Black Death led to labor shortages, which gave surviving peasants more bargaining power. Cities began to grow as displaced people sought work and shelter. The medieval world shifted from a feudal system, rooted in land and lords, to something more dynamic and eventually more urban. In a strange way, the death of these towns gave birth to something new. It is easy, from our modern vantage point, to look back and wonder how people allowed their homes to simply vanish. But medieval life was precarious. People lived close to the land, to their beliefs, and to death. A bad harvest, a violent raid, or a passing sickness could change everything. There were no safety nets, no insurance policies, no weather forecasts. Life was lived with a deep awareness of nature's moods and fate's whims. Walking through a field where a medieval town once stood, it's hard not to feel the echoes. Perhaps a child once played near that stone. A woman might have fetched water from that well. A merchant once dreamed of expanding his stall to a second market. All gone, not with a bang, but with time. The grass grows tall, the past sleeps beneath it. The reasons why entire towns disappeared in the Middle Ages are many and intertwined. Plague, famine, war, economic shifts, environmental changes, and fear all played their part. They remind us how fragile human settlements can be, and how history is often written not just in grand castles and epic battles, but in the quiet retreat of footsteps, leaving home for the last time. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the forgotten corners of the Middle Ages. It is incredible to think that once thriving towns full of life, laughter, and daily routines could simply vanish from the map, whether swept away by plague, famine, war, or the slow shift of trade and time. These lost places remind us just how fragile human communities can be. Behind every abandoned well or crumbled stone wall was a family, a story, and a struggle for survival. These weren't just ghost towns, they were once someone's whole world. If this glimpse into the past made you wonder what stories lie beneath the fields and forests we pass every day, you are not alone. The Middle Ages may seem distant, but their traces are all around us, if we take the time to look. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's strange, tragic, and fascinating moments. And as always, keep asking questions, because sometimes the most forgotten stories are the ones that teach us the most. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.